paint. Yay! Hello guys! I'm here with Charlie today. We welcome you to my YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much for watching and for being here and supporting my work, as always. Today I bring you a video about beginning with watercolors. So painting with watercolors, it's very fun and I really enjoy it because it's very unexpected and you can learn a lot, be creative and just play with water basically. So who doesn't like to play with water? So the basic materials you'll need to start painting with watercolors are a small palette, watercolor palette like this one. This one is actually the first one that I had from Winsor & Newton. This one is the one that I used in my uni days and it has just a few colors. As you can see, some of them are already finished. So you don't really need many colors to start with watercolors, as you can then mix and match different shades with different colors and do your own colors as well. And if you really like watercolors, you can get a bigger palette like this one. This one is also Winsor & Newton and it has plenty of colors, it has plenty of space, so you can mix colors and make your own shades and so on. And yeah, but if you're starting, you just get a cheap, small watercolor palette and you're good to go. The next thing you'll need is watercolor paper. There are basically two different kinds of watercolor paper. One is hot press and the other one is cold press. Basically, the difference is on the texture. The hot press, it has a smoother texture because of the process that they use to make the paper, and then on the cold press, as you can see, it has so much more texture and you can really feel it when painting with the brush. And also, if you are going to use a pencil to sketch on the paper or for initial drawing, or if you like to do lines with pens at the end of the painting, I will recommend to use the hot press because it's smoother than the cold press that has texture, so your line will be so much nicer and smooth on the hot press. What I will suggest, obviously, is that you get a paper that it's at least 300 grams, so that will hold the water that you put on it. You can try using lighter papers, but you will see how it bends and it doesn't really work as good. And there are plenty of brands out there, so you can start with something cheap like this Daleroni, for example. You have different papers from Daleroni. I also like very, very much the Canson paper. This one is also very cheap, like student grade, and it's cold press, this one, but it doesn't have as much texture as the other ones, so that's also very nice. You also have 100% cotton from Daleroni as well. This one has a little bit more texture. It's basically you need to try different papers and see what you like. Next, you'll need some watercolor brushes. I have 3 here just to show you different sizes. These ones are round watercolor brushes, and as you can see, they end on a tip, and this one is much bigger and thicker for bigger areas and to hold much more water than the other twos. This one, the smaller one, it's a number 5 that you could use for smaller areas or just for details and finer lines. This one in the middle, it's a number 8 and it could be used for also large or smaller areas depending on what you're painting. And then the last one, as you can see, it's very thick, so it's perfect to do some washes or backgrounds or watercolor splashes. So basically you don't need many brushes to start painting with watercolors. You can just start with 1, 2, maybe 3. You don't need many, as with practice you'll see what you like, you see what you need, and basically you can start and finish a painting with a single brush if you want to. So you don't need a whole set of brushes. Next thing we'll need is 2 water cups with water, one for dirty water and the other one for clean water, so that way we can clean our brushes in the water, and one cup will be always dirty and the other one will be clean water, so we can take clean water and dip it on the watercolor. Next, it's very important to have handy a paper tissue for drying your brushes after you clean them, or to dry any excess of paint, and also it's very handy to dry some excess watercolor or paint or water from your paper. And then, this is not mandatory, but if you like to start your drawing with a sketch, you will need either a pencil or a mechanical pencil. I have here an HB Faber-Castell pencil and then 05 mechanical pencil. And the difference between these two is that you will always get the same line with a mechanical pencil, so in many situations I do prefer drawing the initial sketch with a mechanical pencil. It's also very much cleaner than using a pencil, especially if it's not a hard one like this one. Make sure you always have a sharpener to maintain the tip of your pencil on point. So the first things you need to know about brushes is that there are different ways to hold the brush and to paint with them. So I'm going to show you a few different techniques. Firstly, when you're painting with watercolor, you want to dip your brush very well in water. We don't like dry brushes. And so the different types of holding the brush is like straight, so you will do lines with the tip of the brush, or you can press a little bit more and tilt the brush and just paint with the belly of the brush. And I'm going to show you now what I mean with that. If we hold the brush vertically, we can do thin lines with just the tip of the brush. But if we tilt the brush and paint with the belly of the brush, we can do thicker lines. And of course, depending on the size of the brush you have, you can do either thinner lines, or with this one you can do even wider and thicker lines, or just thicker areas. You can do circles as well. You can also try and start with a thin line, then press, do a thicker line, and then just end again with a tip. This technique works very nicely for making leaves on patterns and stuff like that. So when painting with watercolors, there are 2 basic watercolor techniques that you need to know. The first one is painting wet on wet. This means that you will have a wet area and then you will go and paint with another color, for example, on top or next to it with another wet color. And this will give you bleeding between the 2 colors, and it will make like a smudged area, and the colors will mix and blend nicely between them. You can also make the wet on wet technique by just adding water on the paper, like clean water, and then on top of this clean water you can come and add paint, which already has water, so it's wet on wet. Or the other option that you have is adding color here, and then with clean water, which is also wet, make the paint bleed. you'll make this gradient of color. The other technique that you want to know is painting wet on dry, which is basically if you already have a dry color on the paper, like this one here, you can come and add more details or just put some other color on top of it. And as you see, it doesn't smudge like here because the layer underneath it's already dry. So this technique is used just to make more details in your painting, or just to add more precise and defined shapes into your paintings. When you're painting, you will build your layers from light to dark, and the lighter colors you will get by using plenty of water in your colors. And then once you build up your painting, you can get more pigment, more paint to build a more contrasted image. And once this dries, you can go on top of it with more paint, so it will be even more contrasted and it will have even more details. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a quick painting of a tiger, so you can actually see how I paint and how the process goes. You'll see me use the wet on wet techniques and the wet on dry techniques as well. And I basically use just 2 brushes or so. And yeah, I hope it will be like a fun, quick tutorial for you to see for yourself. And maybe you, if you want, you can try and paint with me while you're watching this video and try to experiment with the watercolors and see how it goes. I hope you like it. Right, so I'm going to paint this tiger with watercolors, but I'm going to do it as simple as I can. But just I want to show you the wet on wet and wet on dry techniques, and just how I use the brush and how I use the tip of the brush for little details and how I use the belly of the brush for larger areas. Right, I'm mixing right now some of the colors that I will use for this painting. As you can see, I'm using my small watercolor palette, so I can show you that it's also possible to paint with little colors as well. You don't need a big palette. So on the painting, if you're using a picture as a reference, you want to see the lighter areas and preserve that white of the paper. And then, as I was saying before, I'm going to do wet on wet. So to do that, I will firstly need to wet the paper, either with a very light color layer or just with water on the parts that we need color. And as you can see, since this bit is already wet, once I add the watercolor on top, it mixes very well. Right, so I'm adding water or light paint on the bits that I want the color. So then I can come and just take some wet paint and add it on the wet paper, and it will smudge and mix with what's already on the paper. So this will be the wet on wet technique. Once you have the lighter areas done, you can go on top with a darker tone for the places where it needs a little bit more contrast. Since it's still wet, it mixes. As you can see here, I'm using the tip of the brush for details and lines and smaller areas. And if you're going to do like a smaller area of the painting, you can change for a thinner brush like this one. So you can just clean your brush and leave it horizontally to dry. Right, so I'm trying to build the shape of his face with as little details as I can, because I want this to be a quick drawing, a quick painting. So as you can see, I am building little by little the contrasts, and I'm doing that with a wet on wet technique for now. As you can see here, I let the brush to touch the wet part. So this is wet on dry and this is wet on wet, just by the edge where it touches. Right, when you want to change the color, just make sure to wash your brush with water and then maybe just dip it on the clean water just to take a clean color. And I'm going to go with the orange, light orange, for some more details and contrast where it needs it. As you can see, I am almost never taking the color that's already on the palette. I'm always trying to mix it and get different tones and shades of the color, mixing it here. The fun of painting with watercolors is that since it's water-based, you can just paint as you go, like you don't have to think much. You can just experiment and see where the watercolor takes you and just maybe go back to it and just play with it. So what I'm doing here is this, since this is dry already, I am doing the wet on dry technique. So as you can see, that technique is more for once you have the layers, the first layers done, you can use this technique to just add more details, give more contrast, add more lines with the tip of the brush, maybe some dots, make some textures. And just with the tip of the brush, make those lines very carefully. Just as I said, we don't want a perfect painting right now. We're just experimenting with the watercolor and trying to see how it works, how it mixes, how it smudges if the paper is wet, how we can control the lines with the tip of the brush. If you ever need it, you can use a paper tissue to dry out any excess of the painting, or if you want to correct something, you can do that. And as you can see, I'm only using 1 or 2 brushes, so there's no need for you to have or use all the brushes in the world for one painting. Just if you feel that the paint is not very wet, just feel free to dip some more water into your brush so the paint flows more easily. So depending how much water you dip your brush in and how much paint you have in your brush, you'll get like a lighter tone of the same color. Or if you, by the contrary, if you use much more pigment than water, you'll get a deep and rich color that it will give you contrast. What I'm doing right now is I'm giving contrast to those parts of the painting that we want to bring attention to. So for example, the eyes, the nose, and just basically just the face. So we leave the rest like kind of on the back. Okay, so I think that will be our tiger finished, and I hope you kind of learned or see how the process of painting with watercolor works. It's basically a lot of experimenting and playing with water. Wet on wet always works at the beginning of the painting very well, or if you want to do backgrounds, I will suggest you use wet on wet technique as well. And then wet on dry, it works for giving details, making contrast, making lines, and just making the painting pop out. I hope you liked the tiger quick painting that I did, and I hope you did it too while you were watching. And if not, you can watch it later and just practice on your own. That will be a fun exercise to do. And thank you guys so much for watching my videos, for supporting my work as always, and stay tuned for more videos. I will try to post one each Friday. So if you like these videos from me, you can like and subscribe. I will really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much.